I've lived on this farm for 13 years. It's not much. A few acres of crops, 2 barns, and enough livestock to keep me going. It used to be quiet out here. Peaceful. Now I don't sleep. Because something changed last night. Something that I can't explain. And I think whatever did this is coming back. It started with the animals. I woke up just before 3 a.m. Didn't know why at first. Then I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. A high, piercing scream that ripped through the night. Not human. Animal. And it was coming from the barn. I shot out of bed. Grabbed my rifle from the closet. My dog, Ranger, was already growling near the front door, ears pinned back. He had heard it too. And if he was scared, that meant something was really wrong. The wind howled as I stepped outside, carrying the smell of wet hay and something else. Something metallic. Blood. I moved fast. My boots crunched over the dirt path leading to the barn. I could hear the cows bellowing inside, panicked, their hooves stomping wildly. Something was in there with them. And judging by the way they were screaming, it wasn't human. I reached the barn doors. They were wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. That wasn't right. I always locked them at night. I raised my rifle, gripping it tight. My finger hovered over the trigger. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. Like the air was too still. Like the barn was holding its breath. I flicked on the overhead lights. And froze. The screaming had stopped. But the smell of blood hit me hard, thick, suffocating. I took a step forward. Then another. And that's when I saw it. Something had slaughtered my cattle. All of them. Their bodies were ripped open, throats torn out, blood soaking the straw-covered floor. It was a massacre. Blood dripped from the wooden beams, pooling around their hooves. The air buzzed with flies. A warm, wet iron smell filled my lungs. I staggered back, nearly slipping in the gore. And the worst part? Some of the cows hadn't been killed clean. Some of them were still alive. One calf, barely a year old, lay on her side, gasping for air. Her stomach was split open, intestines spilling out onto the hay, but she was still breathing. Her eyes darted wildly, but not at me, at something behind me. I turned fast. The barn doors were still open. The fields beyond were pitch black. Something was out there, watching. I could feel it. Presence. Cold. Heavy. Wrong. Like the night itself was staring back at me. I took a step toward the open doorway, raised my rifle, scanned the darkness. Nothing. Just the wind rustling the tall grass. But that feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. Like whatever had done this was still close. Waiting. I was out there for maybe 5 minutes. Didn't hear a thing. Didn't see a thing. But I felt it. Like something was standing just out of sight, watching me. Like if I took one more step into that field, I wouldn't come back. I backed away, kept my rifle raised, walked back into the barn. The calf, the one still alive, was dead now. Her body lay limp in the blood-soaked hay. Her mouth hung open, frozen in a silent scream. Like she had seen something I hadn't. I had 2 choices. 1. Stay out here and find whatever did this. 2. Get back inside, lock the doors and wait for sunrise. I chose the second option. I wasn't a coward, but I wasn't stupid either. I backed out of the barn, gun still raised, and hurried toward the house. Locked every door, every window. I sat in the living room, lights off, rifle in my lap. I didn't sleep, didn't even blink. Because I knew, whatever killed my animals wasn't done yet. I must have nodded off at some point. When I woke up, it was just after sunrise. The house was quiet. I stood, stretched. My back ached from sleeping on the couch. For a second, just a second, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. Then I stepped outside and saw the fields. The barn was gone, burned to the ground. Nothing but smoking embers where it had stood. And surrounding the ashes were footprints. Not just one set, not just 2, dozens, maybe hundreds, all leading away from the barn and into the fields. The barn was gone. Nothing left but smoldering wood, curling smoke, and the sickening stench of burned flesh. But the worst part? The footprints. Not mine. Not from boots. Bare feet. Small. Thin. Like children's. And they weren't coming from the fields. They were coming out of the barn. Like something had been inside before the fire started. Like something had walked away. I stepped forward. The ground was still warm. The footprints were fresh. Not from hours ago. Minutes. Maybe less. I wasn't alone. I turned toward the fields, scanning the horizon. The wind pushed through the tall grass, bending it in slow waves. No movement. No shapes. But I could feel it. Something was watching me. I raised my rifle. My heart was hammering. Ranger, my dog, whined behind me. I glanced back. His ears were flat. His tail was between his legs. He was backing away from the fields. I had never seen him act like that before. He wanted me to leave. And he was right. I hurried back to the house, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I reached for the landline, dialed the sheriff's office. It rang once, twice, then a click. A familiar voice. Sheriff Gorman. I exhaled. Sheriff, it's me, Jack. I need you to come out here. My barn. I hesitated. How the hell do you even explain something like this? Something happened. I need help. A pause. Then, Jack, it's 6:30 in the morning. What's going on? I swallowed hard. My barn burned down last night. My animals were slaughtered. And I found tracks. Footprints. Another pause. Longer this time. What kind of footprints? Bare feet. Small ones. Like kids. But they came out of the barn, Sheriff. I don't know how, but... All right, Gorman cut in. Stay put. I'll be there in 30. Click. The line went dead. I let out a shaky breath. Sheriff Gorman wasn't the kind of man to panic. But something in his voice had changed when I mentioned the tracks. Like he had heard this before. Like he already knew what I was talking about. A knock at the front door. I froze. Too soon. Gorman couldn't have gotten here that fast. Another knock. Louder this time. I grabbed my rifle, moved toward the door, checked the peephole, and my blood ran cold. A man stood on the porch. Tall, thin, wearing a dirty gray jacket, dark jeans, and boots caked in mud. His skin was pale, like he had been standing in the cold all night. And his eyes. Something was wrong with his eyes. Too light, too empty, like he wasn't really there. I gripped my rifle tighter. Can I help you? I called through the door. The man smiled. A slow, calculated smile. Morning, he said. His voice was hoarse. Raspy. Nice farm you got here. I didn't answer. Didn't unlock the door. Something about him wasn't right. He wasn't a neighbor. I would have recognized him. And what the hell was he doing out here this early? The man tilted his head. Like he was amused. Shame about your animals, though. My stomach twisted. How do you know about that? His smile widened. Was out for a walk. Saw the smoke. A long pause. Then, mind if I come in? Every instinct screamed at me. Do not open that door. I forced a tight smile. I'm kind of busy right now. Maybe later. The man just kept smiling. Like he was waiting for me to change my mind. Then he nodded. All right. Turned. And walked off the porch. I watched him leave. He moved slow, deliberate, like he had nowhere to be. He walked past the burned barn, past the footprints in the dirt. And then, he stopped, right at the edge of the fields. He turned back, looked right at me, and from his jacket pocket, he pulled out something small, something red, and he placed it in the dirt. Then, he walked into the fields, and disappeared. I stood there, heart pounding. I should have just let him go. I should have locked the doors, grabbed my keys and driven into town. But I didn't. I stepped outside, gun still in my hands. I walked to the spot where he had stood, and I looked down, at the thing he left behind. A small, red box. The lid was slightly open. I reached down, picked it up, and inside was a set of keys. My truck keys. The ones that had been inside my house. I stared at them, my mind trying to catch up. I had left them inside the house, On the kitchen counter. I was sure of it. But now, somehow, they were out here, in a box, left by a man I had never seen before, a man who had just walked into my fields, and vanished. I spun around fast, scanned the grass, the tree line, the open land. No sign of him, no sign of anyone, like he had never even been here. But he had, and he had been inside my house. Ranger was whining. He stood a few feet away, body low to the ground, ears pinned back. He didn't like this, and neither did I. I grabbed the keys, shoved them in my pocket. Then I walked back to the house, this time checking every window, every door, looking for any sign of a break-in. Nothing. Everything was still locked. The landline sat on the kitchen table. I picked it up, dialed the sheriff's office again. It rang once, twice, then a voice. Gorman. I let out a breath. Sheriff, you on your way? A pause. Then, change of plans. My chest tightened. What do you mean, change of plans? Gorman sighed. We got a situation in town. You're gonna have to sit tight. My grip tightened on the receiver. Sheriff, someone was on my property. A man. He left something here. And my barn. I heard you, Jack. His tone had changed. Colder. I'll be there when I can. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Anger flared in my chest. He was brushing me off. But why? He had sounded interested before. Concerned. But now he just wanted me to wait. I wasn't waiting. I grabbed my keys, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and drove. Not to town. To the fields, where the man had disappeared. The truck rumbled over uneven dirt. The grass was tall, swaying in the breeze. I had spent years working this land, knew it better than anyone. And yet, right now it felt unfamiliar. Like I was trespassing on my own property. Like I wasn't supposed to be here. I killed the engine. Got out. The air smelled like dirt, rain, and something else. Something rotting. I gripped the rifle tighter. And then, I saw it. A tree. Standing alone in the middle of the field. I had never noticed it before. Not once. But now it was the only thing I could see. Something about it was wrong. The bark was stripped in places. The roots were exposed, twisting out of the dirt like veins. And at its base, a hole. A shallow grave. My stomach turned. I stepped closer. The smell got worse. Flies buzzed thick in the air. Something was buried here. Something fresh. I dropped to my knees. Shoved my hands into the dirt. I dug. Fast. Desperate. And then, my fingers touched something soft. Fabric. I pulled. And as the dirt fell away, I saw what was underneath. My breath caught. Because lying there, half buried in my own field, was a shirt. Not just any shirt. Mine. The one I had lost weeks ago. The one I had searched the house for. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I had ever lost it at all. I scrambled backward. Felt my pulse hammering. Because now I knew. This wasn't the only grave. I had been looking at this all wrong. I had been looking for a stranger. For an intruder. For someone who had been inside my home. But what if I was the intruder? What if I had already been here before? And I just didn't remember? The wind picked up. The tall grass rustled. I turned. Scanned the field. And then, I saw them. 2 figures. Standing far off, just at the edge of the field. Watching. I raised the rifle. Shouted. Hey! They didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just stood there. Silent. Waiting. Then, one of them lifted a hand. And waved. Slow. Like they knew me. Like they had been waiting for me to come back. The 2 figures stood motionless at the edge of the field. Too far to see their faces. Too still to be normal. I raised my rifle and shouted, Hey! Nothing. No reaction. Then one of them moved, raised a hand, and waved. Slow. Casual. Like they had been waiting for me. A cold sweat broke out down my back. Who the hell were they? What the hell were they doing on my land? I took a step forward. Then another. The wind rushed through the grass, bending it around my legs. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. because something wasn't right. They weren't wearing shoes. Their feet were bare, covered in dirt. And their clothes, mud-stained, tattered, like they had been out here for days. No, not days. Longer. Then I got close enough to see their faces. And my stomach dropped. It was Sheriff Gorman. And the man from my porch. I stumbled backward, eyes wide. This didn't make sense. Gorman was supposed to be in town. I had just spoken to him on the phone. And the other man, he had walked into the fields hours ago. Now they were here, together, standing barefoot in my field, staring at me like they were waiting for me to figure something out. What the hell is this? I demanded. Neither of them answered. They just kept watching me, expressionless, like I was the one who wasn't supposed to be here. My pulse hammered. I gripped the rifle tighter. Say something, goddammit. Gorman finally spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless. You shouldn't have dug it up. I felt my stomach twist. What? His eyes flickered to the grave behind me, the one with my shirt buried in it. You weren't supposed to find it. A gust of wind pushed through the field. The grass hissed around us. I could feel the blood draining from my face. What the hell is going on? I whispered. The man from my porch, the one who left the box, grinned. You really don't remember, do you? His teeth were too white, too clean, like he was enjoying this. I took a step back. My breath came short, shallow. Remember what? No answer. Just that same knowing smile, like they were letting me put the pieces together myself. I turned back toward the grave, the dirt I had dug through with my own hands, the shirt that had been buried there. My shirt. No, I muttered. No, that's not. But I knew. The reason my barn burned down. The reason Sheriff Gorman backed off. The reason the footprints were bare feet, small. The reason the man on my porch knew so much. The reason he left my truck keys in that box. Because I had already been here before. Because I had already met them before. Because I had already buried something here before. I staggered backward. My head was spinning. My vision blurred. No, I whispered again. I wouldn't. The man from the porch took a step forward, smiling that too wide smile. You already did. I turned and ran. I don't know why. There was nowhere to go. But my body moved on instinct, running from something I didn't want to understand, something I refused to accept. I sprinted back to my truck, threw the door open, started the engine. The fields blurred past me as I sped toward the house. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, rushed to the front door, and then I stopped, because the door was already open, slightly ajar, like someone had just walked inside, or like they had never left. The front door was open, not kicked in, not broken, just open, like someone had walked inside and never came back out. Or worse, like someone had left it open for me. I stood there, frozen. The wind pushed against my back. The fields rustled behind me. Somewhere out there, Sheriff Gorman and the stranger were still watching. Waiting. Like they already knew what was inside. Like they already knew what I was about to find. I tightened my grip on the rifle and stepped inside. The air was stale. Wrong. Like the house had been empty for a long time. Even though I had been living here for years. Or at least I thought I had. Now I wasn't sure of anything. I moved toward the kitchen. The table was clean. No plates. No mail. Like nobody had used it in weeks. But that wasn't right. I had just been sitting there this morning. Hadn't I? My eyes flicked toward the landline phone on the counter. I grabbed it. Dialed Sheriff Gorman's number. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, a phone rang behind me. I spun fast. The ringing was coming from the living room. From the couch. From the pocket of a coat draped over the armrest. A dirty, gray jacket. My blood ran cold. Because I had seen that jacket before. This morning. On the man from my porch. The ringing stopped. A voicemail played. Gorman's voice. Jack. It's me. We need to talk. It's about the farm. It's about what happened here. You can't run from it forever. Click. Silence. Couldn't breathe. I reached for the jacket. Shaky hands. fingers trembling. I pulled it off the couch. Something heavy slid out of the pocket, hit the floor with a dull clunk. A key, rusty, old, and tied to it, a faded leather tag, with one word burned into the surface. Cellar. I felt sick. I knew what it meant. I knew where it led. The one part of the farm I never used. The cellar beneath the barn. I had sealed it up years ago. At least I thought I had. Now I wasn't sure of anything. I stepped outside. The wind had stopped. The world felt too still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to open the door. I walked to the burned-out barn. The cellar door was still there, half buried under dirt and ash. The lock was rusted, but the key fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for me, like it had never left my pocket at all. The door creaked open. The smell hit me instantly. Rot, dirt, something else, something dead. I pulled out my flashlight, stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy. I could hear my own breath echoing against the walls. And then, I saw them. Bodies. Not fresh, not new, old, dried-out remains, wrapped in torn cloth, lined up against the walls. Some were small, too small, children, their bare feet covered in dirt. The same footprints I found in the field. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. This was impossible. This was wrong. And then I saw the last body, wrapped in plastic, face still recognizable, even after all these years, because I had seen it just this morning, because I had spoken to him, because I had let him into my house, because lying there, cold, lifeless, staring up at me, was Sheriff Gorman. I staggered back. The flashlight shook in my grip. I had just spoken to him. Hadn't I? Hadn't I? Or had I just been talking to a memory, to a ghost of my own making, to something my mind refused to let go of, to something that had been dead for years? A creak behind me, a footstep. I turned too slow. The rifle was ripped from my hands. Something slammed into the side of my head. I collapsed to the ground. Dirt filled my mouth, my nose. I tried to push up, tried to turn over, but a boot pressed down on my back, forcing me deeper into the dirt. A voice, familiar, soft, amused. "I told you, Jack. You weren't supposed to dig it up."